Hello, my friend, it's Gina. Thank you for continuing the long journey in the effort to find justice for Elizabeth. This is an account that's based on a true story, one that, as of this recording, remains ongoing. Welcome back to Lost Sister, a Discarded Woman, Episode 9. Content warning. This and future episodes contain sensitive topics and may cause distress to some listeners. Hearing disturbing actions of oppression, manipulation, and abuse can bring up painful memories, personal struggles, and trauma for many. Narrator's note: the names have been changed and places are purposefully arbitrary to protect the privacy of those involved. This podcast is our way of telling Catherine and Elizabeth's story so that others can be aware of potential future issues. The central figures in our story include Catherine, her sister Elizabeth, Elizabeth's husband Walter, and Walter's granddaughter Darcy. Additional figures: Elizabeth's family attorney Alex, and Sam, the assistant county attorney. Let's recap. In episode 8, of course, the biggest blockbuster was the discovery that Walter's son is alive and has lived in the same area as Darcy his entire life. Until the police detective discovered him because of his record, Elizabeth's entire family believed Walter's only child died as a very young man. Whether the fact that he has a long rap sheet was a reason for Walter to bypass both his son, along with his wife, from his will, is a fact we may never know. The federal district attorney contacted Catherine, and even though their office doesn't handle this type of case, they confirmed that what is going on is indeed a crime, one that feels like fraud. During the conversation, Catherine was encouraged to reach out to the FBI once again, this time using fraud in the submission process. The promise that the federal DA's office would be happy to discuss the case with them if an FBI agent is appointed. We also learn that it had been reported that Darcy seems to be spending quite a lot of the money she now controls, and that she's retained another attorney, this time from out of town. Episode 8 concluded with this: due to the unwavering determination, Catherine not only found someone who had access to Walter's death certificate, but they also supplied it to Catherine within minutes. Now, let's continue our story. Catherine and Charles learned about Walter's death from the staff at Elizabeth's care home. Quite some time after Walter died, the staff only learned about his death because someone overheard Darcy telling Elizabeth. Now, there was no obituary. There was no funeral. When the state where Walter lived and owned a house at the time of his death couldn't provide a death certificate because they did not have a death certificate in his name, Catherine's search led her to another state, which eventually circled back around to the funeral home that organized the cremation of Walter's remains. Surprisingly, the answer from the funeral home representative was, "Yes, I remember that one in particular, and I've wondered why no one in the family has asked for the death certificate. Since your family is guardian of Walter's spouse, I can send it over to you. If that's okay, I'll email it to you right away." Moments later, Catherine was looking at Walter's death certificate, and incredibly, the cause of death was not what she expected to see. The formal cause of death was marked as vascular dementia. Well, in case you're like me and don't know what that actually means, here's an overview from the Mayo Clinic's website. Vascular dementia is a general term describing problems with reasoning, planning, judgment, memory, and other thought processes caused by brain damage from impaired blood flow to the brain. One can develop vascular dementia after a stroke blocks an artery in the brain. But strokes don't always cause vascular dementia. Whether a stroke affects the thinking and reasoning depends on the stroke's severity and its location in the brain. Vascular dementia can also result from other conditions that damage blood vessels and reduce circulation, depriving the brain of vital oxygen and nutrients. Factors that increase the risk of heart disease and stroke include issues such as diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and smoking, which also raise vascular dementia risk. So it's good to remind ourselves that Walter suffered his stroke over 15 years ago. Plus, Walter had comorbidities. Well, I'm sure most of us are familiar with the term comorbidities from COVID, but what it really is when two or more medical conditions or diseases are present at the same time in the patient. Walter had uncontrolled diabetes. He was a very heavy smoker, and he had high blood pressure. To sum up this information, Walter suffered a stroke over 15 years before his death, and the cause of his death was vascular dementia. But he has been deemed just fine by the attorney that changed his will mere months before his death. Yet, he also managed to move large amounts of money between his wife Elizabeth's account and his own. And then he moved every penny of his accounts into Darcy's name. All of that while he was physically unable to leave his house on his own. He's wheelchair bound, living in a house with no wheelchair ramps and no car. So he must have had help if he physically went to an attorney's office. On top of that, if you remember, because of the stroke paralyzing half of his body, it made his speech extremely garbled. Could he have actually made a phone call instead? Or did the attorney make a house call to revise the will? If that's so, did that attorney take a notary and witnesses along? As to exactly what transpired, there are conflicting statements. The attorney's statement indicates one scenario, and Darcy's statement indicates another. Sure makes one wonder. The clear fact that Walter was physically and verbally diminished should have set off enough red flags to warrant assessing his mental capacity to protect everybody involved, particularly before being allowed to change a will, for Pete's sake. With even a whiff of suspicion that he wasn't anything but fully capable of making big decisions. The fact that he was allowed to move money, large sums of money, from Elizabeth's account is outrageous. And not for nothing, but if he wasn't physically present with proper identification, how the hell did they manage to get his signature on any documentation? And is there proof either way? Nope. What was that? Did someone ask why? Oh yeah, maybe because the county attorney is refusing to issue subpoenas for bank records. Weird, right? It's obvious that Walter was at the very least assisted in accomplishing all of these things. Now, my friend, I do not believe we are exaggerating here. If lay people like us can see that this is purely and simply a crime, perhaps multiple crimes, why are Elizabeth's family having to beg to be heard? It's so blatantly apparent what's going on here. But those at the top of the justice food chain stand in the way or flat out refuse to pursue a deep investigation. The likelihood that Elizabeth outlives the money Darcy has so graciously given to the guardianship account is honestly quite high. And the fact that Darcy is all the while living the high life is more than offensive. It's immoral and criminal at its core. Bloody hell. So let's not stop here, though. Here's more Google machine research. Are there people or entities that can't be disinherited? Typically, there are restrictions for disinheriting spouses and children. Can somebody challenge disinheritance? Why, yes, they can. For example, if the person disinherited can prove that the will was created under duress or undue influence, they may be able to contest it. When someone uses their position of power to persuade the testator into modifying their will, this is called undue influences. In most cases, a surviving spouse cannot be completely disinherited from a will. State laws regarding spousal inheritance generally follow one of these: traditional spousal share, the augmented estate approach, or, more than likely, at least community property. Of course, laws in every state differ, and there are statutes of limitations to be considered. That's why most people who want or need to challenge legal documents are encouraged to seek advice from an attorney. It's a good time to remind us that Elizabeth cannot advocate for herself due to the fact that she was deemed mentally incapable to make decisions by a judge. Only her guardian can do that on Elizabeth's behalf now, which is exactly why the judge permanently removed Darcy as guardian. I don't believe Darcy would protest this will. Do you? Accordingly, it's worth repeating the straight-out, basic facts of this case, folks. Without a doubt, Elizabeth has dementia. She admitted it freely long ago, and her family agrees that Elizabeth has gradually declined mentally since her retirement. Darcy moved Elizabeth and Walter across 4 states without a word to Elizabeth's family. At some point, approximately 10 to 12 years before the move, Darcy connected with Walter and started visiting the couple, maybe once a year, according to Darcy. Which, by the way, meant that Darcy never knew Walter before the stroke. Elizabeth was admitted to hospital after the 3rd dislocated shoulder, and Darcy made a statement at that time to the hospital that neither Elizabeth nor Walter is capable of making decisions. The very next day, all of Elizabeth's assets are moved to Walter's account. The day after that, Elizabeth was placed in a basic facility with nothing but that damned metal cot, old misfitting clothes, and basically no contact, no stimulus, and without her prescribed memory medication for months. Less than 1 week after the money transferred, Walter's will was changed, cutting Elizabeth completely out. His previous will left assets to Elizabeth were she to survive him. 3 months later, 2 days before Walter's death, Darcy forms an LLC. The following day, all but $50,000 of Walter's entire estate is moved into Darcy's name. The day after that, Walter dies. Darcy files for probate the very same day, declaring Walter's estate consisted only $50,000 and the little house that's in his name. Cause of death filed, vascular dementia. Once again, given Walter's condition, none of these actions should have ever occurred, especially now that we know he suffered more than the debilitating stroke. He also had vascular dementia. That no one will ever know exactly when it began, but due to the fact that he died from it, well, there is no question whatsoever that he should never have been allowed to make any type of decision for a very long time before his death. He was not fine. Not physically, not mentally. So, was everything orchestrated from the very beginning with ill intent? Was it just dumb luck that Darcy made contact originally, then establishing herself as Walter's granddaughter? The very one he said he had no knowledge of. If you remember, Elizabeth made a statement to Catherine that Walter himself questioned Darcy's lineage. But later, he just accepted her as his granddaughter. No matter how she accomplished maneuvering Walter and Elizabeth's entire estate into her own hands, it's obvious it was done with the goal of getting control of the money. Period. That enormous echo in the room you hear is, now what? It's been established that few within the justice system are willing to do anything, at least anything of consequence. Elizabeth is in a safe place that fits her needs right now. And for that, the family is very grateful. Even though it's clear that the money Elizabeth's care account was given will not last long enough to keep her comfortable throughout her life. I'm sure you're not surprised that Catherine is still refusing to give up fighting for her sister. Elizabeth will not be a discarded woman again if Catherine has anything to do with it. There is still one avenue that Catherine wants to continue pursuing, and that's the FBI. Join us soon for episode 10, Lost Sister, a Discarded Woman, catching up with Elizabeth. It's really important. Abuse in all forms is an equal opportunity instrument of control, regardless of age, gender, IQ, education, or socioeconomic status. Whatever your age, for your own sake and those who care about you, please establish a living will. Keep it somewhere your chosen caretakers can access it. And if you don't have your assets in order, make plans right now to do so. Talk to an attorney and/or an investment institution you trust and make it happen before it's too late. The terms elder abuse, elder neglect, and elder fraud are relatively new. In general, elder abuse is a term referring to any knowing, intentional, or neglectful act by a caretaker or any other person that causes harm or serious risk of harm to a vulnerable elderly person. Legislators in all 50 states have passed some form of elder abuse prevention laws. A good place to start for more information is the website justice.gov/elderjustice. And if you suspect elder abuse, there is help. The National Elder Fraud Hotline is 1-833-FRAUD-11. That's 833-372-8311. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 800-799-7233. These links and phone numbers are also located on the Lost Sister webpage, lostsister.buzzsprout.com. I hope you continue following as Elizabeth's family continue the struggle to help her in Lost Sister, a Discarded Woman. If you enjoyed our episode, please like, follow, and share with your family and friends. By gaining a wider audience, we hope to bring attention to not only Elizabeth and Catherine's story, but to shine an enormous light on all domestic abuse, elder abuse, domestic violence, and elder fraud. More must be done to protect the vulnerable in our society. Our hope is by sharing Elizabeth and Catherine's story that it might help others to avoid the same happening to them or someone they love. Thank you.